So having set those things up, I can move forwards and it will basically bring up with a chart that will start to measure. If I click Start Measurement, it will instruct me to open up the probe. And I'm just going to drop that. And in terms of placement, we ideally want this to sit right in the middle of the screen. The cheaper the display, the bigger the variation in brightness from the center to the outer edge. Hopefully you've got a good quality one, so that should be pretty uniform, but just in case it isn't, and one tends to want to have the most detailed objects in your frame in the middle or near the middle, then it's best to set the probe in the middle as well and get that right. So I'm just going to plop that on the screen, hit next, sit back and enjoy the show. It's now going to go through a whole variety of different test patterns, and in a minute it's going to ask me to adjust my screen brightness. So you can see it's actually giving me an indicator. It's saying that my measured white luminance level at the moment is nearly 400 nits. Well, I'm not surprised. We're in a bright room and I've turned the brightness up on my iMac almost on full. In fact, if I do put it on full, it's showing measured white luminance. You can see it's giving me live feedback. Measured white luminance of 511 nits. That's not really too much of a surprise. This is the latest iMac Pro, and one of its features is it has a 500 nit high brightness display on this. So I'm going to just adjust the brightness on my screen until that little quality indicator. So I'm now at 170, still too bright. 116, let's go one up, 134. 121, you can see, oh, it's dropped again. So I'm getting as close as I can. On the keyboard, I can only do quite big steps. I can do smaller steps if I click on, where is it? It's in my display preferences. If I go into my display here, and I'm just gonna, so it's a little bit, I'm just gonna do this. If I use this slider, it's actually more accurate. So that's gone up to 117. Let's just hide that again, go up a little bit more. 119, good enough for me. So I'm going to hit next. It's got a little green tick there. And now it's going to continue with the test pattern. So now it's checking, now it knows that the brightness, the luminance is set correctly. It's now showing a series of different test patterns. And come the end, I'll have a calibrated computer monitor. So I'll know that when I look at this display, everything should be accurate. And should stay that way pretty close for a little while. If this ends up being a long session over multiple days, I might do this every morning. And what's worth doing is waiting for the monitor to warm up. So the backlight is at the temperature that it's going to be operating at. Okay, so this is now done. I'm just going to take this away and just close it down. And it's asking for me to continue through and set up the profile. So what it's going to do is it's going to load what's known as an ICC color profile, and that is essentially how the computer monitor calibrates itself. So it's a little profile that tells the monitor how to display everything. If I click through here, it brings up the profile that I've just created and asks me to give it a name. I would name it with the name of the display that you've just calibrated, and I would put the date. So let me just type in date here, and that will remind you when that profile was created. So if you go to start a color grading session and you go and check the profile and you realize that the date was from 2 months ago, you know it's definitely time to upgrade that. You can choose whether or not that profile is loaded in at the user level or the system-wide level. I'm just going to do it for me because we always log in as the same user on this system when we're color grading. I can set a reminder in 1, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, which is very useful. There is an ambient light monitoring, which it actually uses the ambient light meter in the display. So as the ambient light goes up, it actually adjusts the image. To always turn those off. They're also available on a lot of mobile devices these days as well. It completely ruins everything we've just talked about with display gamma and control of your lighting and the ambient light in your environment. It just all goes to pot if you leave those things on, so do turn them off. And if you have mobile devices, I'd encourage you to turn off any kind of auto white point tuning where they measure the light levels around you and change the color temperature of the screen. And if you consume a lot of content on those sorts of devices, you're almost never going to be able to see it as the colorist intended. So now that that's all done, I can just hit create and save profile. What's cool is if you've done this with multiple monitors, you can then put that test image up on multiple monitors and just eyeball it. Now, we're actually surprisingly good at eyeballing differences when monitors are very close to each other or objects are very close to each other. When they're far apart and you're looking at them in different places, different locations, we're actually quite poor at recognizing differences. But it is more than you don't need some high-end probe to put two monitors next to each other necessarily, or certainly not at most levels of production. You can just eyeball it and go, yeah, they look visually identical to me, and so you can just move on. That's it. That's my monitor now calibrated. So the next step then is to use the same probe, but with now my reference monitor. I need to use some slightly different software for this, and there are a number of different solutions out there. I personally use Display Cal, which is an open source piece of software. Lightspace CMS is very good. There's Calman. So there are other solutions, but this is the one that I'm using because it's a free open source one, and it seems to do a good enough job for what I'm using. So when I launch it, it asks about the display instrument. What I need to do here is, because the probe is hooked up to the computer and the software is running on the computer, but I'm measuring something else, my reference monitor, I need to feed a test pattern to the reference monitor. And for me, I find the best way to do that is actually set the display to resolve. Now, I could do this whole thing for the iMac display, but I've just done that with X-Rite's own software that I don't need to do it again. I'm going to set this to resolve, and it will actually send a test pattern through resolve to my reference monitor. You put the probe on your reference monitor, choose the location where you want the test pattern to appear. So instead of it covering the whole image, it just does a small square. So you just choose where that square will appear and place the probe there. And then it does exactly the same thing that I've just shown you happening on my computer monitor, but happening on the reference monitor. I'm going to hit calibrate and profile, and it's saying it's waiting for a connection to 192.168.1.93. If IP addresses scare you, don't worry. It's just like, remembering a friend's phone number. Well, actually, no one remembers people's phone numbers these days, but you know what I mean. It is just a phone number, essentially. It's the phone number for the Blackmagic device that's feeding my video signal to my reference monitor. So if I go into Resolve, and this only works if you're in the color page. So I'm just going to go to the color page quickly, go into the workspace menu at the top, monitor calibration, and I'm going to choose SpectraCal Calman. So this is actually another company's test patterns, but the software I'm using has been made to work with that test pattern. So there's also Lightspace as an option in there. So I'm going to choose SpectraCal Calman, and it says, right, plumb in an IP address. It's already got the port set to 20002, so I just need to type in 192.168. What was it? 1.93. Click connect, and it says connected. So it's as simple as that. I go back to Display Cal, and it's got this measurement area. Now, wherever I put this box on my user interface, on my computer monitor, is where the test pattern will appear on the external reference. So it's a bit weird because you've got the probe. I'll put the probe up there, but I'll have the measurement area set here. So again, I'm going to stick it right slap in the middle, because that should make it nice and easy. I'm going to set the probe up here. I'll do that in a minute. I'll put the probe up there. I click Start Measurement, and then off it goes. It will send the test pattern via Resolve to the monitor, and it will do exactly the same process that we've just looked at with the built-in monitor.
I take quite a lot of breaks compared to a lot of other colorists, so I definitely try and have a break once an hour. We're quite lucky here because the suites have access to natural light, so we can just open the blinds, have a conversation with the clients. In daylight, they can reset their eyes, you can reset yours. For the few minutes lost in those breaks, I think you end up with a much better grade because you've come back to it with fresh eyes and you're assessing it almost for the first time again. And there is no truer judgment of an image than if you see it for the first time with clean eyes. That's how your brain works. It's referential, so it's always sort of looking for change and how it was before. And if you're working on a shot, it's easy to kind of drift off. So by having regular breaks and having quite a strict way of not getting, stuck on a shot or a scene and moving on and coming back to it, you have that gut reaction on that second or third or fourth viewing after the break.
Once your calibration is finished, you will come back with some kind of report normally, depending on the software that you're using. These reports basically show you the values, the RGB values for the target charts that they've been sending out, and then the variation between what it should be getting and what it was measuring. And that's, of course, what it corrects out and when it calibrates your monitor. The most important number here that we want to be looking at is what's known as the delta E. You may often see this referenced when you're looking to purchase computer monitors or TVs as well. The delta E is a measurement of how far away from ideal a specific value is. So how far away from ideal the black is, the greys, the whites, the primaries, the secondaries. And you can see a report similar to what I have on screen here would appear. It's showing you a number of different test patterns that it's sent out. And then you can see in this final column the delta E. This isn't the delta E report for what I've just done with my monitor. This is just a generic one I've just pulled up off the internet. But the important thing is you can see all of these different numbers, and it's got with Display Cal, it gives you a color coding. So the numbers that you're kind of hoping for are, well, under 1 is basically perfect. It's indistinguishable from perfect. So if it was expecting 1 hue and it's measured another hue off your screen that is less than a delta E of 1, then it means they're perceptually absolutely no different. You visually won't be able to tell the difference between them, even if there is a slight technical variation. Actually, I would say up to 2 or just over 2 is still perceptually incredibly difficult to distinguish with the eye. So, you are looking at that kind of ballpark. Delta E's in excess of 3, 4, 5, they're the types of things that, they're not horrendous, but they're kind of numbers that you would get back from a cheaper monitor, basically. So that's something that you can look at in your measurement report if you're using Display Cal or whatever software you're using. You should be able to find out this information. And it just gives you a general kind of, if you like, a health check of your computer monitor or your reference monitor after you've performed your calibration. But now that this is calibrated, I know I can trust what I'm looking at. I know that there's going to be consistency across my screens as I glance around and I'm working, and I'm ready to kind of essentially color grade in anger now. So it's all very well having a perfectly set up color grading suite and calibrating your monitors, but you may well find yourself at some point with your client actually there with you whilst you're color grading. Now that might be a new experience for you if you are an editor. You're probably used to working on your own. With color, it tends to be that the director and even potentially the director of photography, they want to be involved with that because they know what a big impact potentially the colorist can have with their work, with their baby that they're handing over to you.
Working with a colorist is a luxury. Doesn't happen very often on projects. You don't really have the budget for it, but when you do, there's a reason why that's all they do. Even when I first shot some DSLR stuff on a Canon, this was in LA, and we had a colorist, and I'd graded my own Canon stuff and it looked okay. I was shocked at what he could pull out of the image, out of an 8-bit image. It was incredible. And that was one of my first experiences of seeing a real pro colorist bring it to life.
The collaboration between DOP director and colorist is really crucial. You'd hope that your DOP is on the same wavelength with yourself when you're directing. They understand the vision, they understand the look that you're trying to create. Then essentially when you get to post, you're passing that baton from the DOP over to the colorist. As a director, you kind of have to oversee that. And the strength of the understanding of the vision between those three parties is what creates that kind of singular vision. So getting that right is really important.
It's really good if you can have your client in a separate area where all they can see is one monitor, the client monitor that they are viewing and you are sending a feed to. And that way you don't ever have the problem of them looking across over your shoulder saying, I want it to look like that, and you've got something completely different on your screen, or you happen to have, you were trying something out. It's just best to kind of keep them separate if you possibly can. And the kind of setup we have here, where we have our TV here, but my grading suite is set up over here, so they can never see my screen, but I can see their client screen and I can speak to them. I've got a really good line of sight here. So it's quite a nice setup for clients sitting in and working with me on a grade. You also want to make sure that the area where they're sitting isn't too comfortable. You don't want them falling asleep whilst they're trying to sit there and check your work. They are going to be there for hours on end. Make sure there's Wi-Fi for them. Make sure that there's power, maybe a little desk even for them to work at when they need to, because there are going to be periods of time where they've given you some direction and then you're working, continuity, for example, can take many, many minutes, if not hours, and they don't want to be sitting there sort of twiddling their thumbs watching you do all of that work.
Work with colorists a lot. It's actually a process I really enjoy. I've had really good experiences and really bad experiences. I had a couple of colorists I would literally punch, and I'm not holding back. that walk in the room and they've never been involved on the job, and they've never even read the brief, and I had one that sat down and said, right, we'll sort this out. I mean, seriously, who says that? And you know that's not going to work straight away. What I love to do is work together in unison, and that I walk in and give a colourist a brief and say, look, this is what's in my head, but let's see where you'll take it. I don't want to box them into a certain way of doing something as well, and then see what they're going to come back to, and then I guide them towards where I want to head to. So because it should be something you work together. I mean, I have very strong beliefs in how it should be coloured, because, I mean, being a stills photographer, I've done a lot of time in Photoshop, so, you know, I've always graded my own work. Before that, I used to do colour printing in the darkroom, so I understand colour science and all of that. You know, if we put in this colour, we dial this out. There was a phase a while ago, you know, and it's quite funny, you can see it from what was being broadcast, is that all the TV commercials on air had a very wishy-washy look to them. And it was driving me up the wall, and I talked to one colourist, he said, oh, it's because every director walked in, they saw the raw file up on screen and went, oh, I want it to look like that, and it became the trend. They weren't really working with the colourist to do it. I think, you know, with a colourist, you have to work with them to pull out the best images. And, you know, the best colourists I've worked with, you literally set a look, and then you only have to make tweak comments from there on in. What I don't like is where this philosophy that some of them have of I'm coming in to sort it all out and save the day. Look, that might be a case if somebody's badly exposed or not shot right, but with the work we do, we know what we're doing. So for me, that puts me off kilt straight away. So I've had a couple of run-ins where we haven't seen eye to eye. I do think it's a very personal thing, and I mean, I know that, you know, facilities, post-production facilities, they got the work because of the colourists they had there, and they were the most important person there. I still do believe that to a degree. I mean, I know you can do a lot more in your desktop environment, but the colouring is the thing that makes the final shot. I do colour myself, I play around, and, you know, I've got Resolve, and you've seen my little setup here. I can HDR fully grade if I want to. I know my capabilities and how far I can go, so I can do certain stuff. But then, yes, you need that real person to come in and finesse it. The art of colour is a beautiful thing if you get it right.
Just like I talked about in my other course, Directing Colour, if you can work with the director and the director of photography to maybe choose film stocks or cameras or lenses or lighting, you know, work with them during pre-production, possibly be involved with the development of the treatment in the early stages. That's the kind of ideal scenario, but isn't always the case, and in fact often isn't the case. As a colourist, in fact, I often get called in right at the last minute, you know, either through bad planning or lack of time management, or just they weren't expecting to have to finish picture to that level. Whatever it might be, it often seems to be the case that I'm brought in with only a week or two's notice, so involvement during pre-production isn't really a possibility. And in those circumstances, what's crucial is you get a really clear brief from them. Make sure you get clear visual references, image references, stills, video, whatever it is that it takes for them to communicate their vision for their film to you as the colorist. And make sure you read that brief, make sure you fully understand it and ask questions before they turn up for the grading session, because you want to make them feel like you understand what they're after. And if there's any kind of uncertainty about that, then you can lose their confidence and you can lose their faith in your ability, and it can make a session kind of drag and not go well.
The only thing I can say about colorists, they can get a little bit carried away, especially they're using Resolve and they start isolating all these different parts and bringing them up, and there's like 20, 30, 40 nodes, and they've ruined your shadows, they've brought them up, and it's like the image has completely changed to how you lit it. It's always good to work with the colorist to explain what you're going for, because the colorist can change everything pretty much in post. And when you're shooting it, you're shooting for a specific look. And you do need to communicate with the colorist to make sure they understand what you're trying to go for.
When the day comes that the client arrives and they're sitting there, they want to get cracking straight away. So they don't want you sort of asking questions about tone or about the look that they're trying to develop, or, you know, that should have happened earlier on. So make sure you actually read the brief and you fully understand it, and ask questions of the client if you're unsure. The other thing is make sure you pick them up if they give you references that seem to contradict themselves. Which of these do you want? Is one for a certain part of the film, one for another part of the film? Or, you know, they may not know, particularly if they're sort of new to working with a colorist. In those cases, if you can pick that up as early as possible and communicate with the client that are they sure they're clear on what vision they have, because it seems from the references they've given you that there might be a little bit of a pulling and pushing from one to the other, and you want to make sure you give them what they want. You know, probe and question them, and don't, you know, patronise them. Don't kind of make them feel like they don't know what they're doing. Just kind of tease out of them a bit more information, and if it looks like they're maybe kind of just choosing a look for the sake of it, and, you know, I think it's fair enough for the colorist to say, well, look, you know, how does that support the narrative? What is it about the narrative that you think serves orange and teal? What calls for the saturation to be pulled out of that part of the frame? Just talk to them. You're the expert. They're there for your help. You know, if they were an expert colorist, they'd be doing it themselves. So don't be afraid to kind of step in and just ask questions. You never kind of say, I'm going to do this because it will make it better, or I'm going to fix this for you, because that's hugely insulting to them and what they've produced and come and brought to you to finish. So just ask questions, get them thinking, and you know, if you handle it right, then you should sort of move in the right direction together. Also, when your client first walks into the colour grading suite, it's worth taking maybe half an hour just to sit down, relax, let them drink a coffee, and just kind of let them bed down. It can be quite intimidating actually for directors if it's their first time sitting in a grading suite. It just gives them an opportunity to relax, and that's your chance to kind of show them that they're in safe hands, you know, kind of confidence, and this is your space and you're here to help them. That's really important.
For me, the vision for what we've tried to create is really strong, and I, you know, really believe that, you know, obviously colouring can just take that vision to, you know, to places which, you know, often are much further than what I had anticipated that we were able to do with the material that we've got. So I think really it depends on the story and the scene and the tone that you're trying to create. If a scene wants to feel you know, dramatic and heavy, there's ways sort of emboldening that and making the you know, scenes feel more cinematic and heavy with the, you know, with the tone and the way you bring out the color of the scene. Whereas other things which are lighter and more open, there's just way that, you know, colors and sort of the emotion of moments can just feel more vibrant and open. So I just think there's just such a huge spectrum to play with when it comes to color and figuring out, you know, what you're trying to do with the colorscape and the tone and the story you're trying to tell.
There are certain things that you hear from a client that you learn are associated with certain looks, and they have a direct impact on the contrast and the hues, and even things like sharpness. You know, if they talk about nostalgic looking scenes or nostalgic kind of feel to their film, then I'd be thinking slightly softer highlights. I'd be thinking about maybe slightly tinting highlights and lowering contrast and lowering saturation to kind of make it almost feel like a faded photograph. You know, there are certain things that you learn words are associated with, and you kind of act as a conduit essentially between the kind of technical process of colour grading and their language that they're using and trying to communicate to you their vision.
When it comes to being a good colorist, a fairly small part of it is the technical ability at color grading. It's about the client communication, that way of collaborating with a director, DP, agency. You know, the way that you approach the project, the way that you look at it, the way that you analyze it, for, you know, with their brief in mind. And I don't, yeah, it's not a one-man show, color grading. Like, everyone in that room color grades the movie or whatever you're working on. You're kind of a conduit for the creative, you know, feelings of the room, and you translate that into the final image.
So you need to kind of sit comfortably in that space between them where you know what your color grading software is wanting from you in terms of lift and gamma and gain and contrast and pivot and all these other technical things, but you have someone sat there asking you for a certain mood or a certain tone, and they're using expressive, emotive words that you need to translate and put into practice. If you hear these certain keywords, think about the impact that has on contrast. If it's nostalgic, well, often that's quite kind of lower saturation and lower contrast. They tend to be kind of like faded photographs almost. If they want something punchy, if they want something dynamic, if they want something glossy, these are all words that to me make me think of a higher contrast look. All of these keywords have a direct impact on the contrast, on the colors, and even, you know, the texture, the clarity of the image, the sharpness of the image. Is it sharp? Is it soft? Is it harking back to a more simple time? Is it a flashback? Is it a dream sequence? These are all things that are going to directly influence the way that it looks, and so these key words need to be listened out for during the early stages of either pre-production or when they first enter the suite and they're having those early conversations with you from the client area, with you sat in the grading suite, taking control of the situation, and yet also making them feel at ease and trying to get to the bottom of what they're actually after. I worked with a director once who loved to say, "Just a tickle," which was really funny, and we had a good laugh about it, but it became like a running theme over the day we were working together. Could you just bring the highlights up just a tickle? Could you just tweak that just a tickle? So you never know what you're going to get with clients. I think they're good fun sessions, to be honest. I love, you know, given that I have a background as a cinematographer myself, I actually really enjoy the opportunity to sit with directors, but particularly DPs, and kind of pixel peek with them and have a good chat with them about, you know, all kinds of geeky stuff. They're really nice, fun sessions, but you need to remember that you're there to serve their vision, and you need to make sure that you get done what they want and you communicate clearly with them. So now we have our colour suite set up. We've got a comfy area for the client to sit in. They can watch us work. They can give us input. We know things are calibrated. We've got a fast RAID. We've got calibrated reference monitors, a monitor for our scopes. We've got a fast computer with beefy GPUs ready to take everything on. You now have had a chance to communicate with the client, and you're all ready and set. And now's the time that you're ready to head off and dig into that grade. And the first step is contrast.